Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, our topic is attack and defense. Let's get to our first example. And in this position, black is attacking white's rook, obviously. And the question is, what should black do? Is black ready to capture that rook? Or should black be more cautious? That's one thing that's very easy to get carried away with when you're focusing on your own attack or own tactics and forget about your opponent. And that's one of the things I'd like to draw your attention to in this lesson. I suggest you take a few minutes and try to figure out what you should do if you would be playing with the black pieces here. The game itself continued with black capturing white's rook, which seems like simply winning an exchange. But black forgot about something. And it's not white playing knight f6, because then the black queen simply recaptures and the two black rooks will be connected and protecting each other. But black has another trickier move than that, sacrificing the queen and then capturing the bishop on f6 with a check, followed by capturing the queen. And now we can see that white is up a piece, even though black can capture white's knight on e8, but that would result in giving up on the knight on e1. But how about knight capturing the bishop on c2? And this is the tough thing in calculation. And if we go back just for a moment to the very beginning, before black would make the decision whether to capture the rook right now or make a different move, it's important to make the correct evaluation about the variation starting with knight e1, because all of these moves were pretty forceful that we've already seen, and many inexperienced players would simply stop the calculation at this point, evaluating the position, let's say, roughly equal, or at least materially speaking equal. However, a more experienced player would go just another move or two further and notice that the white knight can not only get escaped from the attack on e8, but right away move to a square that creates a fork. Also, it's important to notice that because of white well-placed bishop on h6, basically black has a back rank problem, and therefore the rook is unable to move to a7, holding on to the bishop, but because it would give up the control of the entry point of the white rook to the back rank to b8. The game itself continued now by black playing rook to d8, white captured the bishop. Now white is already up a bishop, which is certainly a winning material advantage, especially in an endgame. And after black's attempt to at least win a pawn back, white had some more tactics planned, and after bishop g5, black cannot avoid losing further material, because if the rook moves on the d-file, white will check and then bring the rook down to checkmate on the 8th rank. Or if the rook maintains control of the 8th rank, for example moving to c8, then black will lose the knight on d4. So what this means is that capturing the pawn on d4 made things worse, temporarily won a pawn, but ultimately lost an additional piece. Going back to the very beginning in this position, now we know the truth. Now we know that knight captures rook on e1 is a mistake that not only does not win material, but ultimately leaves black at least a piece down. So now that we know that, we can go back to the drawing board and try to look for a better way to continue. Another very natural way to continue here for black would be to move the bishop from f6 and capture the pawn on d4, which is certainly one of the first things to look at once we know we don't want to capture the rook on e1. However, the problem with that is that it opens up the d-file, and after white would move the rook right there to the d file, to d1, black will find a bit too many pieces being on the d file. And because of the pin situation going on, black will be in an unpleasant situation. Going back again to the very beginning, what to do then? After all, white is threatening to right now capture the rook on e8 and win material. The best way to respond right now is to play bishop back to e7, and then black's position is defendable. Let's go to our next example. Here we go. In this example, which is also from a real game, it is again black's turn. What do we see so far? Well, black is a pawn up. That's very good. Black is also in full control of the only open file, the E file. Black's rook already entered the second rank, which is certainly good news. The B2 pawn is hanging. Now let's look at it from the other side. So far we looked at it only from black's perspective. Let's look at it from white's perspective. What's going for white? Well, the H file is semi-open, and in fact white is about to capture black's pawn on H5. In view that the white queen is already on D3, that means that rook H5 is actually a pretty dangerous threat, because the white queen then would be threatening to come into H7 and then checkmate. Or, after the white rook would capture on H5, potentially the other white rook would be ready to double up on the H file, also with major threats of checkmate on H8. So in a situation like this, when we see that the enemy rook is about to come down towards our king and checkmate threats are all over, it's important to do damage control and prevent it as much as possible. Black in the game was a bit greedy and went pawn hunting, capturing the pawn on b2. Guess what would have been the correct move here? Well, the correct response would have been playing g6, simply protecting the pawn on h5 and maintaining black's extra pawn and advantage. White still has some counterplay, but with correct defense on the black side, black should be just fine. Let's see how the game continued after black's mistake of capturing on b2. Now white is ready for a full-fledged attack. And of course, the first move in that plan is to capture on h5. Now the threat is obvious, with the white queen appearing on h7 and then on h8 checkmating. Black aimed to prevent that by playing g6. Now this not only stopped the checkmate threat on h7, but also attacked white rook on h5. And now this is another key moment from the attacking perspective. When you're in the middle of attack, time becomes a very important issue. And I am not talking about the time on the chess clock. I am talking about the momentum of the attack, not to waste time on defensive moves, but preferably either combine a move that's progressing your attack with the defense, or ignore the opponent's attack and try to make forceful moves to follow up your own attack. Right now, there are two attempts that may be reasonable looking. One is to immediately ignore the attack of black and play bishop f6 with the idea to then checkmate with the rook in the corner, sacrificing the rook, with the idea to then bring the queen to f5 and create some very dangerous looking checkmate threats. However, if black now finds the correct defense, black is just doing fine, maintaining the significant material advantage. And it's again one of those situations that black does not necessarily need to maintain all the material advantage they have, but as long as they maintain some of it and stop white's attack, they'll be just fine. And that perfect move is to play rook e5. Now, the white queen will not get to g5 to check black's king, neither it will get to h5, and if bishop captures back, white's attack is pretty much over because the black bishop on the long diagonal just controls all the key squares on g7 and h8, and white's attack doesn't go much further. Let's go back a tiny bit. After rook b2, rook takes h5, g6, bishop f6, and captures. At this stage, not all is quite lost yet for white if white rather captures black rook on b2. Nevertheless, black would be still a pawn up, and after a cautious preventive move of queen d7, which prevents the white queen from getting to f5, white can bring still the rook with rook h1, attacking the pawn. And now, again, the bishop becomes the hero by playing bishop e5, offering the exchange of bishops, which conveniently for black, if it happens, bishop takes e5, the black rook will capture back and protect the h5 pawn at the same time. So again, white's attack does not succeed. For example, if white would go all out, sacrificing the bishop on b2, after queen h7, king f8, a perfect example how the black bishop, even from a faraway distance as b2, is guarding all those key squares on h8, g7, or e5, and white cannot make any significant progress. Okay, let's go back to the stage where black just played g6, because in fact, white can win right now. And this is one of those situations that I was referring to, that time is the essence. When you're attacking, bringing additional pieces to the attack with a tempo, with forceful moves, makes all the difference in the world. Like in this case, before I go any further, I suggest you try to figure out the correct solution on your own, and then check if you were correct. And that move is rook h8. Very nice move, a rook sacrifice, which if it's not accepted, the king moves out to g7, for example, black just loses a rook. So let's see what happens after king captures. Now, again, forceful move, bishop f6, king g8, and now all of a sudden the rook comes to h1 with a very immediate threat. Checkmate on h8, and there's not much significant that black can do about it other than delay the end by couple checks and then game over. This is actually how the game ended. So what did we learn from this example? When your opponent is on the attack and you already have material advantage, usually it's more important to prevent the opponent's counterplay than hunting for additional material. Here, it was absolutely necessary to play g6 to make sure the h file doesn't open. Let's see our next example. Here we go. This game has arisen just after 12 moves in the Sicilian gambit, where white sacrificed a pawn early on by playing b4 and then a3. Kind of a rare guest on high-level tournaments, but I think it has more poison than most people think it does. In the meantime, white has just moved his knight to h7, while the black pawn was still on g7, and black responded by playing g6. That's how the white knight got there to an unusual square. And right now, it's a key situation, because why did that knight go there if it has trouble coming back? Well, obviously, white had something sneaky in mind, namely to use that knight on h7 to control the f8 square. We can notice that the black king is surrounded by all of his own pieces on other squares on d8, d7, e7, and f7. But why does it matter? Well, white has a very tempting combination at the disposal. In fact, there are two options on how to proceed. Can you think of the idea? Yes, I hope you were correct in that white can sacrifice on g6. And in fact, white did sacrifice on g6. Let me show you how the game continued. White played bishop to g6, first of all winning a pawn, also protecting the knight on h7. However, white does not have any immediate threat. In fact, black has a very good defensive move at disposal. And that move obviously is not capturing white's bishop, which would end in checkmate on the following move, but it is to pin the bishop with rook g8. Now, white has only one logical continuation, and that is to capture on f7 to at least open up the position in front of black's king, king f7. And now this is a key moment. The white queen is hanging where to go. Preferably it should be with a tempo, with a check. And white chose to play queen h5. It seems that it was a better option to rather give the check on f4 and then go pawn hunting on h6. Because this is not just a pawn hunt on its own, but it creates also a serious threat of queen h5. And now if black responds with king f7, for example, then white could continue by playing f4 and have certainly some compensation. It's debatable whether it's sufficient or not, but black certainly needs to worry about the safety of the king. Let's go back. In the game, white gave the check from h5. The difference now is that black is able to block this check, and after the white bishop captured on h6, the black queen got to g8, which is a very key move. On one hand, opens the escape route for the black king via e8 and d8. On the other hand, attacks the knight on h7, as well as creates a new threat with rook g2. In the game itself, white saved the knight on h7 by retreating the bishop to protect it. And of course, the rook on g6 for now is pinned, so it's not an immediate threat to capture on g2. But after king e8, followed by king d8, the black king will certainly be safe, and black will simply have an extra piece. White still has a pawn as compensation, or maybe even two after capturing on a3, but nevertheless, black's chances are clearly better. Well, let's go back, and we saw the resourceful defensive options that black had after bishop g6 right now. And instead, white had a very brilliant and elegant move that they missed, that not only was more pretty or beautiful, but was more effective as well. The correct move was to capture the pawn with the queen. Obviously, the idea is the same. If pawn captures, bishop captures with a beautiful checkmate. The difference, however, is that now white has some real threat, namely to just move the queen up to g7 and kind of trap the black rook in the corner. White would have a clear advantage here. Let's move on. Here we go. In this position, black has just captured white's rook on f1, and at the moment, black is up a rook. If right now, white would capture black's rook on f8, black would simply capture back, and the position would be close to equal. If white would try to continue the attack by playing bishop f6, black would simply move the knight away and win. If white would capture back on f1, black would, rather than moving the rook away and allow a dangerous attack for white, similarly as what we shall see what happened in the game, then black would rather capture this important pawn on e5, and then if bishop takes rook, rook takes back, and black is a pawn up. The key idea in this position in general is for white to bring another important attacking piece quickly to the king side, namely the knight to e4. Now the idea is to play knight f6 or knight g5, depending how black reacts. And here black has a very important defensive move, which is not to capture the bishop, which would allow knight g5, and then black would be forced to give up the queen for the knight to avoid getting checkmated. But to play here knight f5. That's the key move, attacking black's queen, while the bishop on e7 is still hanging as well. And quite importantly, knight f6 would be answered by queen f6, and if bishop takes, knight takes, black is up a rook, which is certainly not good. To save the day, white should capture queen takes rook on f8, and then the queen, but nevertheless black will be still remaining a pawn ahead. Let's go back all the way and see what is the correct move for white. Well, as we learned the idea from the previous variation, the best option for white is to bring the knight immediately, ignore everything else that's hanging, and focus on what's important, and that is to checkmate the black king. Now black is in major trouble because in addition to the threat of knight f6, knight g5 is in the book as well. Black continued with queen e5, knight g5, and black had nothing better than giving the queen up. Queen took back, h6, queen returned to d2, even better than capturing the pawn, avoiding knight f5 ideas. Rook moved away. Bishop f6. Remember, the bishop on f1 is still hanging. And now, even better than king g2, queen h6, and black gets checkmated on the following move. So what did we learn from this example? Well, we learned how important time is and our priorities. Rather than winning material back, white was focusing on the enemy king. Bringing an additional piece to the attack brought its desired result. Let's move on. In this example, it was black's turn, and black played knight to d3, a tricky little move. Seemingly, it is a blunder. While we can see that the white rook from d1 cannot capture it right away because of losing the rook on e1, it's not as clear why can't white first trade rooks and then capture the knight on d3. And obviously, black had to be ready for this scenario before black would play knight d3 in this position. After knight d3, white has other options and probably should consider playing rook f1 at this stage. But let's follow up with rook e8, and rook takes d3. This was the last moment for white to save the day and play queen c2. But white captured on d3. And now black again, forceful move, comes down, and another forceful move. White blocks, and queen f2. And now we can see that the checkmate threat on g1 is serious. The best that white can do is open a little escape route for the king, but it will ultimately not help the end result. Queen g1, when the king starts being chased towards the middle of the board, things rarely end well. After rook e2, the upcoming queen g2 will come close to the end. So again, when your opponent makes a move that looks like it may be a blunder, be suspicious. I'm not saying to always believe that your opponent sees more than you do, but just be suspicious and double check or triple check whether the opponent's combination is a trick or is it a blunder. And finally, let's see the jewel of the week. In this position, it seems that it's game over for white. Black is up a rook and a pawn, and the white king is also wandering around. The white knight is pinned. Things look pretty hopeless. However, there is a magical way to save the game. And it is related to the fact that the white king can only move to one square at this moment. I hope this hint helps in figuring out the solution by yourself. Good luck, and then come back and listen to the solution. And the answer is Queen A3, forking White's king and rook. Black comes and protects the rook, King B6. And now the beautiful move, Queen B3, check. And when Queen takes, all of a sudden, not only that the White king has no moves, obviously the knight is pinned and has no moves, but the B2 pawn can no longer move either. A beautiful example of stalemate. Thank you for listening, and hopefully this lesson helps you make better decisions when it comes to attacking and defending in your own games. Please don't be afraid to send me emails with questions or suggestions on how to improve our lessons or what other ideas to cover. Thank you for listening. So long until next time.